recording presentations, and if you have a Gmail account, you have automatic YouTube channel. So that means that what I've been doing is uploading videos to YouTube. And you'll find videos on some counseling skills and whatever presentations that I've been doing that I remember to record. So I'm just gonna do that for a second and say hi. Hi. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm grateful to Dr. J for inviting me. I love supervision, and I'm going to give you a little bit of history with how I got into doing supervision and what's happened over the years. But Emily came to talk to me, interview me. Was it just last week? Week before last week? And as we were talking, I asked her, "Well, have you covered this particular model of supervision?" And she said no. So I thought it would be a good idea for you to know this, because I have to tell you, I've gotten thousands of miles out of this particular model, as it's applied to counseling as well as to supervision. So I think it's so practical that I really would love for you to know about it as well. It's not one that's typically covered in the supervision books, so it's new stuff. It's good. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and this model of supervision. The handouts that you have are about situational leadership, and then how situational leadership was adapted to counseling, called the adaptive counseling and therapy model. And then, ironically, how it comes full circle, because supervision is also considered leadership, right? Then how it's further been adapted to counseling and counseling supervision. And you've gotten this little 1/3 sheet of paper. I do have a drawing for a gift at the very end. So if you just want to be entered into the drawing, just write your name down. Don't write anything else. I keep an email list of workshops that I present and other things that I'm doing in the area, and a newsletter that I send out with usually a little bit of information on complementary, alternative, and integrative therapies. So you get that too. So if you would like to be included, there are places that you can check off the different email lists that I have. All right, so I'm going to go back just a little bit. I got my master's degree. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say, oh my gosh, at the same time. I finished my master's in 1986 at the University of Virginia. I say that and I think, oh, that's when I got mine. So I was saying, oh my gosh, I was just saying. And I knew I was never, ever, ever, ever going back to school when I finished with my master's. I don't know if you saw that PhD behind my name, but you know, never say never. I worked for 5 years in the university setting. First at Washington University in St. Louis. I was there for 3 years. And then at William & Mary, the College of William & Mary. So at Washington U, I was a career counselor, and at William & Mary, I was the Associate Director of Career Services. So my very first supervisee was someone who was in William & Mary's graduate counseling program, who was 10 years older than me. So I had to learn how to do supervision without background in supervision with somebody who was already older than me. So I got really good at what I called really being collaborative in supervision. I was already pretty collaborative in my counseling anyway, but it really underscored, I think, the importance of collaborating with supervisees. So that was my step into supervision, and I kind of backed right into it. I went back to school. I decided, well, you know, I wanted to get a doctorate. I thought, actually for 3 reasons, because I wanted to do some consulting work. I wanted to continue to work as a counselor, and I also wanted to teach. So there was not just one reason for me to get my doctorate, it was those 3 reasons. I love variety, and I just learned, I try and learn new things about myself, and a couple weeks ago I was at a 2-day dream work, body work workshop done by a good friend of mine, and had a really deep insight of how much I like shiny things. New things, I love learning new things, and so that says I can't do just one thing at a time. I just can't. And so for me, getting a doctorate was about those 3 things. When I finished with my, actually before I finished with my doctorate, I started working at what is now University of North Carolina, Pembroke, as assistant director of counseling services. So I made this switch in the university setting from career services to counseling services. I was there for about 1.5 years, and through lots of personal reasons, among them called a custody dispute, came back to Virginia, got a job in the counseling center here, so working as a therapist. So I did that for 4 years, decided to leave and start private practice, and did that for 5 years. It takes a while. I need you to know this. For those of you, anybody interested in doing private practice work eventually at some point, I want you to know that in spite of the kind of thought that we have about we hang a shingle and people come flooding in, it does not happen that way. We have to do a lot of marketing. It's about having a business as well as being a counselor. And having a business is a whole separate set of skills. So private practice for 5 years, and it was over a summer. One of the things about private practice is, I don't know, if you don't work, you don't get paid. Did you know that? And if you don't have clients, you don't get paid. Did you know that? And in a 2-week period, my client caseload was cut in half. Just out of people leaving because it was time for them to leave, and no new clients coming in, which I hit the panic mode. And at the same time, a position for a full-time faculty member came across my desk. I had already been teaching as an adjunct, and I was interviewed for a 1-year visiting assistant professor position, and ended up being in that position for 3 years, and the 3rd year they said, really? And I kept turning down the tenure track position, so the faculty kind of shifted a position to make room for me and my skills to develop practicum and internship in a different way. So 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago now, I made a decision to leave being a faculty member and restart private practice. And that's what I've been doing since then. My practice now is called Integrative Counseling and Wellness, and I had my first intern starting this summer. I don't know if any of you know, you might not know Tony, Anthony. Okay. And then Emily is going to be a practicum student with me this coming spring. So my practice is still building. It's taking a while. I still maintained it while I was a faculty member, which really helped. But it's taking a bit to rebuild it over these last 2 years. So I told you about my first supervisee. I can see his face, I can't think of his name right now. He played drums, and he had been in a band. He was already in his mid to late 30s at the time, and Gary, I just adored him. He was great because he had a lot of life experiences that he brought to the counseling relationship. And I already had some skills and experience working as a counselor, so that's how we collaborated, from what I understood about counseling skills and what he was able to bring in terms of life experience. That made a big difference. So when I went back to school, I had to do a doctoral internship, a practicum, clinical practicum here. And I actually went back to UVA. So I have 3 degrees from University of Virginia. It's sort of redundant, I guess. That never going back to school thing was because I just don't like being a student. I love learning, I love teaching, but being a student is hard. Did you know that? I just kind of checking out on that. When I was in my internship, my supervisor at the time introduced me to this model for counseling. And I just fell in love with it because it was a strategic way to be integrative. Now, when I was, back then we called it eclectic, and you don't want to use that term these days, you really don't. It's more appropriate to call it integrative. And this gives a wonderful framework for providing integrative counseling. And being strategic about what that looks like and how you apply counseling skills and theory. So we'll back up. The first page of your handout is situational leadership, because that's going to be important.
Can I, if you don't have this book by Glenn Blanchard?
Ken Blanchard, the 1 Minute Manager.
It's about this big. It's on my desk. I have had it forever. It's wonderful.
It's a really great resource. And Ken Blanchard, anything by Ken Blanchard is
good.
so readable for counselors and so very applicable for counselors too. He writes about business and applied leadership, and just how he talks is very metaphorical and just helpful. So you know the book, Who Moved My Cheese? Did anybody ever read that? It was co-written, or he has actually facilitated that being written from a colleague of his. So it has a similar kind of style to it. So situational leadership says there are different kinds of leadership styles that exist, and the best leaders modify or adapt their leadership depending on who they're leading. And for counselors, we have to meet our clients where they are. So this kind of, do you see how I'm going to start folding in how I think it makes complete sense. So this is the model where actually, because of how it works, I think that I ended up something didn't show up on here, but it'll show up on some of the other ones. The first quadrant is the directing quadrant. So although we usually read from left to right, because of some of the how the continuums work, the first quadrant is the directing quadrant, and then it goes coaching, supporting, and delegating. And I'll talk about some of the other pieces to this. So there are different dimensions that we look at for situational leadership. And I want you to really start paying attention to how that applies to counseling too, because this has everything to do with how people show up at work and show up in our offices or wherever it is that we happen to be working with clients. So on this first, let's see, what do I have? Okay, I'll do this. I really like Ken Blanchard's definition of leadership. It says it's the process of influencing another person. And while we as counselors, that's not what we're tasked to do, it's kind of what we do. As we collaborate with clients to help them reach their goals, we are also influencing them. Now, it's reciprocal. They influence us. I am deeply affected by the clients that I work with, and if you're not, then probably you're holding yourself back. I have to tell you that. That's my opinion. I'll just say that's my opinion. So situational leadership then is based on the principle that there's no best leadership style, okay? There's no best leadership style. We have to look at leadership skills and how they're applied depending on who it is that you're working with. So the most effective leadership style is when there's a match between the leader and whoever it is that they're leading, the follower, we'll call it that. And this is a developmental model. Do you hear how the applications are really easy now? So to match leadership style to the development of a person, you have to look at the different conditions. So we'll look at just how this is broken down. It looks a little bit mathematical, and when I see mathematical equations, as much as I tend to get good at them, I look at it and I think I have no idea what this is saying. So let me explain it to you a little bit, okay? And then,
Can I have their hand
No, because it's just the order of this, it's okay. So, remember I said that the first quadrant was, what? Directing, right? So that's D1 on this. Directing is low competence, high commitment, starting with a directing leadership style. So that says somebody who is not competent, somebody who doesn't have skills. A new employee may not have skills, but are really excited about getting to work. Most people are excited about getting to work. Most people are, not everybody is, but most people are. And therefore, as a leader, what I need to do is to make sure that I am giving that person enough directions so that they learn the skills that they need to learn in order to do the job I want them to do. Does that make sense? Okay, it makes a lot of sense. So the next one is coaching, right? That's D2. Low to some competence and low commitment. So we use a coaching leadership style. So I'll go into more the dimensions that we're also going to look at here in a second. So when somebody has better competence, often there's sort of this shift of, I have this commitment, but I don't know if I can do it. I have this commitment, but I don't know if I can do it. Do you hear that? Then that's a low commitment. And that means that I need, as a leader, to be more supportive. I need to give direction and support at the same time. So that's different than a brand new employee. I need to have some level of support, but really they need more direction. The next level then is coaching, where I'm providing a lot of support and still a lot of direction, or educating. I'm educating people about what it is that they need to be doing. The third quadrant then is, as people become more confident, they need less direction and more support. So the style of leadership is all about being supportive. So that's high competence, moderate high competence, and variable in terms of being committed. People who are not quite committed need more support than folks who have a high commitment level. Do you hear that? And the last one then is a delegating leadership style that says, you got the job, you know how to do the skills, and you're confident at doing them. So I, as a leader, need to back off. Now, think about jobs that you might have had. Anybody ever had a micromanager? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's somebody who could not provide support and had to provide direction no matter what, right? That is a mismatch of, you can do your job. Usually, it drives people batty because they can do the job. But a micromanager doesn't trust and doesn't know how to support and just let people do their job. Does that make sense? Okay, so now let's apply it to counseling. The two, as you heard, the two areas that are really variable from our perspective are how directive are we as a counselor and how supportive are we as a counselor. Same dimensions as with leadership. So here's how it's been applied to counseling. The first quadrant is about telling, the second quadrant teaching, the third supporting, and the fourth delegating. Really similar words, slightly different in terms of application. And the reason, so here's the reason that this quadrant 1 versus quadrant 2, this is less directive, more directive, less support, more support. Do you see how that works? So if I'm going to provide more directiveness and less support, we're going to start here. And that means that this is a client that is very low readiness and needs a lot of direction because they have no idea what they're doing. Now let's start thinking in terms of the kinds of clients that might fit in these quadrants. And then as we apply it to supervision, we're going to start thinking in terms of the kinds of supervisees who might fit in these quadrants. I want you to also think about theories. What theories fit in different quadrants? So if I tell you the kinds of clients that fit in this quadrant, you tell me the kinds of theories you think might fit in these quadrants. I have no idea what that was. So if I say that this quadrant typically is applied to clients who are in emergency services, people who are in crisis. Clients who are in crisis, clients who don't have the skills, clients who might actually be in home services. Anybody working in home services? Usually we have students who do. Okay, you used to. So low task, low readiness, low, and they need to be on task. They need to be directed more. You have that experience? Because children and adolescents, exactly, until they got it. When they got it, then you can help them move on to the next level. You see how developmental this is then too? The next is teaching, moderately low in terms of skills, and then actually it's moderately, yeah, and low readiness too. So, so this is someone who doesn't have a lot of confidence, that's the readiness, doesn't have a lot of, have some skill and still is developing skills. So what kind of clients might fit in this? College students, right? Unless they're in crisis, then they're kind of would go back them down, right?
Anxiety cases.
People have anxiety. Where would somebody with depression?
Depends.
Depends.
What's the severity?
Depends on the severity, absolutely. So severe depression, all the way back down to the
Is there a
talent.
management area?
There's okay, you're overthinking this now.
Sorry.
So but do you see where then someone who has depression doesn't have a lot of motivation on their own, and they're moving toward that being in crisis as well. Someone who has anxiety typically doesn't have the skills or the confidence. They might have skills, they don't have the confidence. So you're going to provide both direction and support. And in our profession, that's called teaching. So we're teaching clients skills, and we're providing a great deal of support as they learn those skills. Make sense? So the next one is, and by the way, many clients will come into counseling ones who come on their own will be more than likely in this quadrant. Ones who are mandated, right, are going to be more in this quadrant, which is it feels like a mismatch. So you have to be really careful about how you give direction to those clients, because they're the ones that are going to say, I don't wanna, you can't make me, right? And we're in this sort of telling mode. How does that work? That's where our counseling skills come in. The third quadrant is about supporting. This is higher readiness, and in terms of amount of, that's confidence. People have more confidence, they have more skills. Still not quite confident. So I'm using confidence, and I think that's on your handout on that second page. So I need to back off direction, because most people got the skills, they just need to be supported in learning those skills even more, solidifying skills. So think true in terms of when people learn skills. The last time you learned a skill, you had it right away, didn't you? Okay, the answer is no. And guess what? Our clients don't either. So that means that we need to provide some level of support as they learn the skills. And as they learn the skills, we back off on direction. We're going to say, well, let's tweak this when they need more direction, and we'll back off and say, oh, how'd you do with that? That's the supporting. And the last one is, and by the way, I think most clients leave counseling towards the end of that quadrant, because by the time that they are high task, high readiness, or in that they can do it themselves, you know what? They're done with counseling, and we need to let them be done with counseling, because it's time for them to live their lives. Right? So does that make sense to you all? Okay. Questions or comments at this point? Yeah.
I can see how this also relates to states of change or readiness for change. So pre-contemplated, contemplated would be in telling.
Perfect.
And active would be in teaching, because we're
Yes.
actively working
Yep.
on those strategies. Supporting would be maintenance.
Yep.
And then delegating determination.
Yes.
They achieve
Perfect.
their change.
And I've also applied this to stages of group development, right? So that was my first application.
Delegating is also, delegating is also what I call tweaking. You might have somebody who's been in counseling for several months and worked their way through it, and maybe they come back 4 or 5 months later just as a check-in with you.
Right. Yeah, I'll say checkup. You know, come back for a checkup if you wanna, like you said, wanna tweak what's going on. If you're saying, I'm not sure if I'm doing this right, that's a good thing to come back and let's figure out what's happening for you. Right? That was beautiful. I loved how you were thinking in terms of stages of change. Do you see too how you can apply it to stages of group development? So if you think in terms of Tuckman's model, are you learning Tuckman's model? Forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. So this is forming, right? The role of the counselor, and please also keep this in mind as you're beginning a counseling relationship. So this model, this quadrant about telling, this is about the beginning of a counseling relationship. Group or individual, it doesn't matter. We're gonna tell clients what our role is, what our responsibility is, what our expectations are. We're gonna talk, do you hear the telling? I'm telling you the conditions of the work that we're doing. Where there's confidentiality, there's some level of privacy, here's what's gonna happen or not happen. Does that make sense? So it doesn't matter. The same thing goes with a group. The group, you're gonna talk about group rules, you're gonna talk about the parameters of how a group is gonna run, and people then say that they need to be told. Otherwise, you're gonna walk in and say, okay, we have a group, and what happens? Do you know what happens when people just walk in and you say, okay, we're having a group now?
Chaos.
Right away. Right, so let's skip over the forming, we'll go right into storming. So then the storming is the phase where you provide a lot of direction and a lot of support. A lot of support, but also some direction. Because when people have conflict, they have a really hard, their confidence goes lower. And then so storming, performing, right. Do you see where performing can fit in? Then if they're on it, then as a group facilitator, then I'm gonna sort of step back and I'm gonna say, oh, good job on that. Yeah, great job. So I'm facilitating what's naturally happening as opposed to stepping in more. And then adjourning fits right at the very end as well, doesn't it? What I usually do is I say, and actually, there's some combination of it, of delegating and even backing up, because as people change tasks, they also regress in terms of where they've progressed to in stages of development. So I might do a combination of delegating and supporting depending on what the needs of the group are. Does that make sense? Right, good. So, key concepts, there are just a few. And that's on your handout, it just looks different. The therapist is the role of a leader in the client-counselor relationship. Therapy does involve influencing individuals to perform tasks that are set as goals for counseling. So we do influence people. We teach people, that's influencing people. You know, it's funny, I say that, and for a long time I never made the connection of why is counseling in the School of Education? Do you hear it now? Because we teach clients skills too. So the next one is direction, and that's how much structure or task relevance that a counselor provides to the client. For counselors and for counseling, this is on accomplishing whatever a therapeutic task might be. Whether that's something that a client comes in saying, I want to work on this, or somebody who's been mandated and has been told, you need to work on this. So that varies. It should vary as clients are working toward tasks and goals. And then support. Support is that other dimension. It's about caring, it's about concern, approval, praise, reinforcement, feedback. What does that sound like? Does it sound like person-centered too? So do you hear how person-centered is one of those underlying theories that would fit in any of those quadrants, along with something else? You can't be a person-centered clinician and work in emergency services. You know that, right? It has to be additional skills along with that. And I say person-centered is the foundation for every single theory from here on out. Is that what you've been saying?
Yes, I even said that I don't even think of it as a technique,
No.
I just think it's a way of being.
It is, yeah. So this is one other thing that I take from there are these three elements that I try and think of in session or out of session. The three elements are willingness, ability, and confidence. Willingness, ability, and confidence. And as I'm working with clients, I'm thinking, how willing is the client to take the next step? And if they're very willing, then I work from a different perspective. If they're not so willing, do you hear what I have to do now? I have to kind of figure out how I'm gonna support them. I have to figure out what's contributing to their willingness or unwillingness. A lot of times that's confidence or even ability. Those two, I think, are the major variables, ability and confidence. I've been talking about that. So ability is about competence. Do they know how to do whatever it is that you're talking about doing? So let's say I'm working with a client and they say, you know, I've heard about this this meditation thing. I work a lot with clients around meditating and breathing and taking a pause. And I say, that's great. And the client says, well, you know, I'd really like to practice that between now and the next time we meet. Awesome. I'm doing them a disservice if I'm not checking in with them saying, what do you know about breathing? Like, we all do it, but what do you know about using it as a stress management strategy? So so what's your confidence about being able to apply it? What's your ability, and then what's your confidence? Do they think they can be successful? If they don't think they can be successful, then we are setting them up for failure. Not a good thing in our work. And I say that because very often new counselors, and not just new counselors, folks who've been in the field for a while, don't take a look at these things with folks. And clients fail repeatedly. And then counselors don't take some responsibility for that client's failure. I'm not saying that we are fully responsible. We are not. Because there is the variable of the client entering the relationship as well. And at the same time, we are in charge of the relationship, which means that we need to be mindful of what's happening in terms of the relationship and the client's development. Where are they? Okay. So that's situational leadership. That's adaptive counseling and therapy. And now we can start applying it back to supervision, which is why you're all here. So same quadrants, same kinds of quadrants. If you'll remember, at the bottom is directiveness. On the side is support, how much support versus directiveness. And these are the words as they've been applied to supervision. Quadrant 1 is the technical director. Quadrant 2 is the teaching mentor. Quadrant 3 is the supportive mentor. And quadrant 4 is the delegating colleague. So let's talk about skill development, where folks are in their learning about counseling. And we'll break it down to classes, right?
Yeah.
So where are students in 633? Now that you've learned about this, where do you think counseling students who are in 633 might be in these quadrants?
Technical director.
Right here. They don't know what they're doing. They think they know what they're doing. So there's a lot of motivation there, right? They think they know what they're doing, but they don't really know what they're doing. They need a lot of direction. Don't do it this way, do it this way. and they don't realize how much feedback they need. And we know that we also have to, this actually for counselors need to be a high level of support as well, but really, we have to be clear about what the skill looks like. And if they're not clear, then we have to back up too. So, you're absolutely right. So what about the 634 students, the advanced skill students? It's probably still here, and a little bit here. Just a little bit, depending on, because one class in counseling does not make you great counselor. How many, are you great counselors right now? You're still in school. How many of you are in practicum? How many of you are in internship? How many of you hadn't even hit that level? So think about where you've been. Especially, so where do you think practicum students might be?
Teaching mentor.
Right there. Yeah, so that is about the application of the skills in particular settings. And even then, so then we can do some subset, right? Let's look at the beginning of the semester versus the end of a semester. Do you hear it? Beginning of the semester, I want to be really clear about my expectations. I want to be clear about what I want you to learn. Do you hear that directiveness? And then I'm going to move into, as a supervisor, I'm going to move into, well, what is it that you want to learn too? Let's figure that out and spend that time learning more. Okay, so practicum definitely in this quadrant 2, possibly moving into quadrant 3, but probably not. How about internship?
Supportive mentor.
So still some teaching, right? And still some a supportive mentor, right? So still learning, right? Still learning. I've been in the field for a long time. You heard when I graduated from my master's program, I'm still learning. So I just need to make sure that I'm meeting, do you hear it? I'm meeting my folks where they are. And when somebody is first starting out, the chances of their being really confident are lower. Their excitement is higher, so I want to harness that. But I want to do a real reality check to where they are in their skills. And I'll tell you this, most counseling students, think they know more than they actually do, or can do more than they actually can. So we over-evaluate ourselves. We think, oh, I know that skill, and then we see ourselves on tape. Has this happened to anybody? I think, I didn't know that. I thought, well, actually, I thought I was doing that. And so there's such a learning mode, which means that as supervisors for students, it's so important to be both supportive and also help people learn. So it's a big burden to help people learn because I think you're also practicing supervision, right, with other students. So here you are, not even out of the quadrants, and you're providing some kind of mentoring to folks. This is where that collaboration comes in, right? And really understanding how much how important it is to support students as they're floundering. And understand that as a new supervisor, you are floundering too. So now we overlay this as applied to supervisees. How about you all? Right? As you're learning how to supervise, where are you in this? So chances are, as new supervisors, people who are learning about supervision, unless you've been out there doing it, you're at this. You're right here. As you learn more about supervision, you'll work your way through. Here's where this, I think, can be a good check. I provide supervision for LPC since 98, 99. And I remember distinctly working with one of my supervisees who had an intern. Okay, so you got the levels, right? So the intern was working at the internship site with my supervisee, and my supervisee was really frustrated. It was mid-semester, and she was still having to tell her intern day to day what the intern was supposed to be doing, right? So let's assess that. Where was the student, the intern, in the quadrants? Still right there at the very beginning. Where did the supervisor want to be? Probably there, or the supportive mentor. Do you see that as a mismatch then? There's also, in terms of assessing, we would hope that by mid-semester there's some progress from one quadrant to another with an intern. It just wasn't there. And when we overlaid this model to my supervisee, the big light bulb went on. That's why I feel so frustrated. So what we said was, then you have to back up. You have to back your leadership up to meet that student where they are. And then provide very clear feedback about where they need to be. Because we do expect people to move through a developmental process from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester. We expect you all to do that in classes. We expect folks to do that as they're at work as well. So when you think about when you have your first job as a counselor, if you've worked in a first job already as a counselor, and any job usually, most companies will give you a 6-month learning period, right? And at that 6-month mark, if you're not at a certain point, it's not working. We don't always know what that point is. But for many organizations, they've outlined, these are the skills we need you to learn and be practicing. This is what we need you to be doing. And if you're not doing that, then you're not meeting the requirements that we have of you as a counselor. Does that make sense? So let's also do this reverse. Let's say we've got a client who is not very confident and has the skills, and we've got a counselor who's trying to tell that client what to do. That's a mismatch. What if we've got a client who feels pretty confident and has the skills, and we've got a counselor who's wanting to teach that client? That's not a mismatch either. The most common mismatch is for new counselors. We want to delegate more to our clients than they are ready for, right? So many of us have a hard time walking that line, and it's a line, it's a very fine line of really providing support and direction to our clients. So we have to be monitoring ourselves all the time about, am I really meeting the client where I am, and maybe kind of moving them in the direction, helping them to move in the direction that they want to move in. Does that make sense? So what do you think of this model?
Very practical.
I love practical. It's very practical. Other comments or even questions?
I love how you broke it down, by theories, the types of clients, and then the classes. I thought that made it very concrete. Rather than abstract. Because even as simple as that is, sometimes people are gonna have a hard time really understanding its application.
Yeah. The original article was written in the 90s, early 90s, for this, the Adaptive Counseling and Therapy Model to Act, how counselors act. And it's a very readable article. It also has an assessment in it, so that you can figure out what your primary style of counseling is based on that model. I can send. I think I can send that to you if you want.
Yeah, if I don't already have it.
You might have it. Yeah.
634?
Yeah. You might. Yeah, you might have it right now.
I'll delve into that.
So that you can see where you are as a counselor, and typically, my guess is you're going to want to do the teaching or the not counsel, this is, we back up to the counselor, let's see here. The teaching and supporting, right? That's probably where you wanna be. And at the same time, you might have supervisees right now who are needing more structure than you're providing. And that creates a really frustrating relationship from the supervisee and a counselee's perspective. Jamal?
It seems like the telling portion,
Yeah.
aside from like the beginning where you tell them about like what you're doing, is kind of not what you use, even when they were mandated ones. You don't tell them because then their defenses go up. It seems like
Right. So
you
let's
go to teaching first.
Right.
Usually.
Well, so let's rephrase it then. Let's rephrase it to structure. How much structure
Okay.
you provide. That's probably a
All right.
better word,
Yeah.
especially for mandated clients and for brand new clients. So the structure I'm gonna provide in a first and second session is I'm gonna talk about, like I said, informed consent, all of that. That's the structure. That is telling. I'm doing a lot of talking in that first session.
Also, like letting them know how the session is supposed to
Exactly.
go, rather than letting it go. Okay.
Right, yeah, and I'm gonna do my interview if it's a new client. And you're gonna do the same kinds of things with new supervisees, like the first supervision session meeting, you're gonna talk about what is the thing that's called supervision, what are your expectations of supervision, what's your experience of supervision been? And here are the limits of confidentiality with supervision, here's the structure of supervision. And yes, you're gonna ask and talk about what your goals are, their goals are. But at the same time, do you see how much structure you're providing? It's the same like the first group meeting, it's the first counseling session, the first supervision session. So to have in your mind what it is that you want to cover in the first couple of sessions, then that's that quadrant. That moves naturally, organically, the counseling and the supervision too. Okay. Other questions or comments? It's a good one.
What do y'all think about the theories in those quadrants?
Oh, yeah. How about those theories? Started with one. Where does psychodynamic fit? So can I tell you, one of the things that I had the great opportunity to do, I believe so firmly that counselors need to be in counseling. I think whether it's like a little bit or consistently, and so over the years, I have brought my little body to counseling, and I had this opportunity when I was in my doctoral program to work with an analyst. That doesn't happen anymore, right?
No, there's one group.
Is there somebody really?
That Jungian, but yeah.
Complete analyst for 2.5 years. I went 2 and 3 days a week. Can you believe that? For 2.5 years. He cut me a great deal. It was $150 a month.
Wow.
I know. Can you stand that? Cost of living would be outrageous at this point. I came in, sat down, and first of all, I had the, I'm not going on the couch, not doing that. But there was a divan right there, and his chair was behind it. Didn't say very much about the process at all. And I came in, I sat down, and there was a big pause. I talked about what was coming up for me. So I'm reflecting, not a lot, but I talked about what was coming up for me. What quadrant is that? Complete delegating. Complete delegating. Complete. Right? No structure. There's no structure. Like, there is a framework for psychodynamic. The framework is about paying attention to time. The framework is about paying attention to transference and countertransference. There is a framework, and there's theory in it. But when it comes to being a client in that role, as a therapist, you're delegating. Right? There's no direction. There's no direction. That was my experience. Make sense?
The psychoanalytic the therapist is the ultimate authority of that, if I'm correct, right? And then they explain to you what they see based on like what defenses come up. And
Maybe.
so, I guess if they're telling you what's going on with you,
It's not very much support, is it?
no.
See, now my
But it's very much telling you what's going on with you. That's why I thought telling.
See, my experience was more in the supporting, because I had one that was both, if you can believe this, union trained, but she was about solution focused in the here and now.
Right, so
let's
that
take
sounds
what
like
happened.
supporting
Yeah.
and the teaching right there.
Let's take what
Yeah.
happened before, and the transference, and the counter transference, and your triggers, and let's put it in the here and now, and let's come up with a solution.
So that's also guiding the session.
Money we get.
They're still guiding the session. So
Maybe because
my
I've never
therapist.
experienced it rather than
Sure.
just read about it.
Sure.
I read about
My
it,
therapist did
different.
not guide the session. I walked in, I
Okay.
sat down, and yes, there was some education that went with it in terms of providing that framework, but my therapist did not guide the sessions. Does that make sense? So here's, I wanna make a note, because I wanna clarify, some of you have heard this in my 634 class when I taught it. I wanna clarify this, countertransference just is. So often new counselors come away from a program saying, oh my gosh, there's countertransference. Guess what? It happens. If you like your client, that's countertransference. If you dislike your client, that's countertransference. So countertransference happens. It's what you do with it. Is it interfering? And if so, you need to take care of it. Not in the client's time, not on their time, on your time. If there's transference, that's from the client to the counselor, then that's what counseling is about. Now do you understand what I say? It's really important for us to have our own therapy, because guess we're gonna get triggered left and right. Our stuff comes up all the time. We may not have an awareness of it, and that, I think, is what counseling is all about. Therapy is all about, is it raising our awareness so that we can very consciously interact with other people, very consciously move toward whatever it is that we're wanting to do in the world. Other theories? CBT. Definitely teaching. There's a lot of teaching that happens in CBT.
How about our EBT?
Delegating.
It's teaching and telling.
Supporting.
More teaching and telling. So here's a secret. That original article has some of this information in it too. Sorry. And by the way, after the article was written, it was a special edition, I think, of JCD. The authors wrote a book. So there was also a book on adaptive counseling and therapy that goes into the different pieces of information in more detail. I think it's a great resource, but at the very least, take a look at the article. It's really easy to get to find on Google. Google is our friend. Other comments or questions?
Yeah, I don't have any other theories you're curious about? Thought there was more of a mixture in this class.
Oh, what about supervision theories?
Oh, there you go. How about the IDM we talked about?
IDM?
Well, it kind of gives it away from the integrative developmental model.
Right? This puts some words to that, doesn't it? Yeah.
It literally follows this.
Right.
And when you were talking earlier about the, sometimes counselors think that their skills are a little higher than what they actually are, that's exactly what my dissertation study showed. Because they had supervisors grading them, and then they were grading themselves, and then they were doing it together, and the motivation was the big factor too.
So you did a nice job of looking at motivational interviewing, right? And then stages of change. Is there a theory that encompasses motivational interviewing and stages of change? Supervision theory? Not that has been written about. sure that the people who are doing motivational interviewing and using stages of change have figured out how to apply that also to supervision, but it's an integrated model. Stages of change is an integrated model. It's a developmental model.
So I can tell you, you're gonna find that even when you're done with your program, you might say, I lean more towards CBT, but you're going to incorporate other techniques from other theories. And you're gonna find that you're gonna do that with supervision theories as well, or models.
Any other questions or comments? So this is practical. You see that it's practical application. Think you'll use it? What about sharing it with your supervisees? Would you let them in on the secret? Sure.
Well, maybe not the
Not this
same.
one.
These
Right, so
supervisors,
there's
but
something
in the
of-
future.
Right, information overload for 633 students, and possibly even 634 students, but you might think in terms of where you are as an intern or a practicum student. Yeah.
I think like once you get past the technical director portion, that's when you can be like, and this is where I wanna be. I wanna be able to give you less direction, so like, let's move towards that, show me your skills. But if you're still like high direction, you're not gonna be able to like.
Right, and
You're not gonna get it.
that's assessing then your supervisee's level of confidence. On a scale from 0 to 10, here's the solution focused stuff, right? They're not the only ones that use scaling, by the way. On a scale from 0 to 10, how confident do you feel about being able to use this skill? And then they use it, and they say, and then you say, now on a scale from 0 to 10, how confident do you feel about using this skill? What's your ability now? Because confidence increases usually with practice and skill. So I've been providing supervision, as I said, since about 1999. And my training in supervision came when I was a doc student. My real training came when I was a doc student, and I fell in love with supervision. I was required in my doc level supervision class to provide supervision to folks that were in the essentially the equivalent of our advanced skills class, the 634. There was also a practicum and internship. And after I'd taken the supervision class, I had a friend who was facilitating that master's level class, and I volunteered to provide some coaching and supervision to students in her class, and I continued to do that until I finished with my doctorate. And then once I got my license, I kind of backed into, I don't know this story. I backed into providing LPC supervision. I was working in the counseling center, and a request from what is now the Up Center came over. There was a group of folks who had an LPC supervisor who left the organization, and they were needing supervision. So I went over to start providing supervision 2 hours a week in a group. It was a pretty intact group. That group, I have to tell you, it was an awesome experience because they were eager to learn. And I have to tell you too that most of the literature on supervision is written for you all, folks who are students, and not for folks who are out in the field, still learning and developing. At least it wasn't that.
It's a lot of academic.
It's
But
really focused on
You still have to know
academics.
Bernard Goodyear, you have to know that
Yeah.
stuff for your.
Yeah, you still do. It does help, I have to tell you, it does help. Having that background and knowledge, just like having background and knowledge of theories really does help, sort of being able to see where clients are in a process. That group, because they were an intact group, and the supervision process, getting licensed, is really essentially a 2-year process. Essentially. For some people, it takes a little bit longer. It took me 3 years to get my license, but some people take a little bit longer than that because of extraordinary circumstances. What we started doing was not just, I believe firmly that supervision, as I do it, has to pay attention to the person's development as well as the person's development as a counselor. And that comes from my strong belief that who we are completely influences what we do in a counseling session. And if we're not taking care of us, then there's some danger that happens in sessions with clients. And so I have focused at least half of our supervision on developing a counselor and supporting the counselor in what they're doing. Because it really is, after you're finished with the program, you've got skills. It's now figuring out how to use those skills more gracefully, more fluidly in the work that you're doing. And that means building your confidence, which means supporting you. So this group, I would invite in guest speakers.